Okay, no video last week. I worked a little overtime at my job and we had snow, so it was just not able to get anything done. This week I didn't get that much done either, but I thought I'd go over what I did and um, explain why I'm not getting much done. I've mentioned it before, the weather's really cold here. So what I've been doing is I have a couple of these small electric heaters, and I'd put some filler material on a part, and then I'd kind of put the heater at it, trying to make sure it wasn't getting too hot or too cold. In the garage, on the floor of the garage, the cold concrete floor of the garage, and I mean, it works okay, but I'm in cramped quarters in the garage. We have two cars in our two-car garage, so I'm in between two cars and trying to put filler material on and arrange these on top of like soda can boxes, and to get them at a height where they're pointing at the filler area that I've done, and it's just a pain in the neck. And I'm not sure I'm going to do it anymore. So not much progress I think will be made until the weather warms up. It is approaching the end of February, so hopefully the temperatures start going up pretty soon and I can do some work outside. One thing I did, I ordered off Amazon an art kit that came with several different hobby knives and tips and cutting mat, some just generally useful stuff, but the main thing I wanted was this chisel tip. One of the ideas I had for body panels that I've printed that have layer lines that are sticking up higher than they should is, instead of concentrating on sanding them down before I put filler material or primer on the part, was to use a chisel tip as a scraper and to scrape those raised areas down. The chisel tip, because if you put it on a raised layer line, hopefully you'll be scraping the layer line down until you're even with the part. And just having the flat tip would help with that. So I thought that might be something I can do. That might take more material off faster than sanding, and if you're sanding, you'd be getting the raised area, but also areas around it if it's a very small raised area you're trying to work at. So it seemed to work okay. Didn't take as much material off as I was expecting, but I was able to work at some areas and get them a little bit lower. So it is a valid idea. It's a valid concept. The other thing I did this week was drop things on the floor. Continue working on these utility arms. I had gone over them before where I had glued them together. They also have areas for bolts, for nuts and bolts to hold them together. Two areas you can see here. And then they have plugs that go in the area, so after you put the bolt in this side that has a round opening, and then the square nut goes in the square side, you put round and square plastic nuts or plastic plugs into the openings. The thing I found is when I printed the plugs at the same standard size as the arms, just loaded the files and printed them, the plugs just dropped right straight down to the bottom. I thought as a plug they would kind of wedge themselves in near the surface, but they didn't. They just dropped straight down, and the nut is about here. So there's a good like 1/4 inch area, and then the plugs aren't quite that thick, so they drop down, and there's a fair amount of area that you would have to use a filler material to get it flush with the top, and that seemed to me like an awful lot of filler material to be crammed in those holes. So I thought I would try printing these plugs at a larger size. So I took one of the round and one of the square plugs and loaded it into my slicer program, and then I printed them at printed one at 100%, so that'd be the standard size, and then 101 and 102%. And when I got done, they were still dropping through. I printed one at 100, and instead of going to 104, I went to 105. So I did 101, 100, 101, 102%. I skipped 103, I skipped 104, and went to 105, and that's what these are. 105, they wedged in, and I just had to lightly tap them to get them in. A couple of them I tapped by using a screwdriver. This is probably one here where I put a small screwdriver, hit the screwdriver with the hammer, and the plugs went in further than I wanted. And of course, by that point, I had epoxied, and there was no room, no way to pull it back out. So that's why on this one here, you can see quite a bit of the tan plastic bond epoxy, and the other ones not as much. Quite a bit on these also. Let me pick up the one I dropped here. Okay, this one. Yeah, this one doesn't have as much. So this was the second one I did, where instead of using a screwdriver and knocking them in, not only did it, because it was a flat blade screwdriver, it knocked them in crooked, and it knocked them in a bit too far. This one I just took a hammer and just pounded it to be about flush, and it came out much better. You can see just a little bit of epoxy after this. I sanded it with 100 grit and then 220. That one has a bit more epoxy there. That one has hardly any epoxy on that one, and then that one's got a bit on there. So I think that worked out for me anyway. I liked that result better. I printed the plugs at 105% their normal size. I put the JB Weld plastic bond 2-part epoxy swirled around in the hole. I didn't fill up the whole gap because I would have used a ton of epoxy. So I spread it around the top upper area of the hole, and then I hammered in the plugs. I also, because this stuff is a 15-minute epoxy, I kind of held it and was kind of rotating it a bit while the epoxy dried, so it didn't all run away from this side, and that would have made these stronger, but the bond would have been a bit weaker because the epoxy would have been dribbling down the open space here between the plug and the bolt. Another thing to do is just leave it like this or this, because then the epoxy will kind of settle like this, and so the top part might not be bonded quite as good as the bottom, but there'll be a lot of glue on the bottom, so they shouldn't go anywhere anyway, because the arms just open and close. They don't get banged around enough to knock those out. And honestly, I don't even know that you need the bolts, because it does have, pretty sure I showed in the other video, it's got small holes that you put some filament in, and they act as alignment pins to align the two pieces together, and then use glue and clamp these two pieces together, and that's probably enough to hold it. You don't even probably need to bolt them together, but I had the right bolts and nuts, so I figured I would. As far as the fit, even with those alignment pegs, This one is fairly close aligned, the two halves. As it gets up near the top, I can feel that one side is a bit higher than the other. This one here, this side is much lower than this side, even with the aligning pins. So this one's going to take even more sanding work. There's a fairly big difference here between this side and this side. So there'll be some filler is going to need to go in there, and this is going to need to be sanded down more. And yeah, this piece is going to take a while. You can see this whole area is going to need to be filled for the stair stepping that happens as you print it. Each of these is printed in this direction, each half. So any angles have got some print layer artifacts, and all that has to be done with filler and sanded. And then the claw inside here, that's all gonna need like fine files to be sanded to get those areas flush, which you're not even probably gonna see them because they'll be they'll be in there. And when they open up, no one's going to be looking from this angle in towards the claw, but still, I'd like to get them a heck of a lot better than they are right now. Fair difference in height between the two halves. Also, remember, bearings go in these holes, and pretty sure again in one of my other videos, if not the last one, my bearings go in there and they're not really firmly, securely seated. So I might try, when I'm mixing up some filler, to put some filler inside this opening that the bearing goes into, maybe. And maybe that'll be enough to get the bearings to sit in there firmly. Although now that I think about it, I don't know if I mentioned it in the last video, but these are going to be primed and painted. Prime and paint will definitely make it thicker. So if you print yours and the bearings fit in really snug, remember you should probably mask that off and don't paint the area where the bearings go, or you're going to have a really tight fit. Whereas, like I said, mine, they go in. If I remember right, they don't just fall out. I have to tap them, but they do fall out. But with some primer in there, that would probably be enough to get it firmly in there. And again, they do go in there, so you don't end up seeing all of that area. So yeah, that's about all I did this week. A little bit on there, a little bit on here. I can show you, I think. Yeah. There you can probably see some of the layer lines, the ridges. I did just only a little bit of work trying to get those flatter. I probably should have spent more time getting my printer to print better before I did it, but before I went ahead and printed everything. But what I got is what I got, and I'm not going to reprint all these pieces. So I'll have to do the best I can. You can see there, it's a fairly high ridge, so I'll be definitely trying to scrape that one back. So the primer will take care of some of that, but I just want the ones that are excessively high. I want to try and mitigate how much possible filler and primer and sanding work I have to do to take care of them. So that's about it for this week, and no promises of a weekly video. Like I said, this weather is just dumb. working in a cramped garage with a couple electric heaters just to try and get some of this stuff done. And sanding outside when your nose is turning red because it's so cold out is just not, makes sanding process, which is not fun as it is, even worse. So I'll still try and do things. One thing, another thing I guess I'll mention, in one of my earlier videos where I was working on the outer feet, and I had a couple bolts that I needed 18 millimeters long, but the kit I bought that has various sizes goes from 16 to 20. There's no 18. My local hardware stores don't seem to have 18 millimeter M4 bolts. So I was going to take some 20 millimeters and cut a couple millimeters off with a rotary tool. I've done that plenty of times before and it works, but I got lazy last night and went on eBay, looked up M4 bolts, and found some, and ended up spending less than $6 to get 25 of them shipped. So I just decided I'd rather not dig up the multi-tool, put on the cutting wheel, get the safety glasses out. I use vice grips to hold the round, the far end of the bolt while I'm cutting off the other end, and then you hope you don't have the end piece when you cut it off with the rotary tool go flying through the air. And I just decided $6 for 25. I'm sure I won't need 25 in this build, so it's a little bit overkill, but for $6, what the heck? I went ahead and ordered them last night. So when those come in, I've got 4 that I need to put into the foot assembly, because they stick out just a little bit too far, the 20 mil that I had. So that's about it for this video, and explanation of why there wasn't a video last week and why there might not be videos every week.